Hello YouTube, and as promised, here's the second video of a one I intend to do. Now, I was going to do this outside where there's a bit more light, but there's a lot of wind out there today and I was worried about the microphone and this equipment, so I'll do it inside. Right, this is the first of the two bikes that you might well be seeing in future videos. I'm just going to use the excuse to give you a quick run over it, and at the same time talk about modifications that you can make to bikes of this age to make them more usable and more comfortable on the road. Right, this bike is a 1999 Kawasaki ZZR 600, a hugely popular size at the time, simply because people seemed to have lost interest in the big bikes for a while. This Kawasaki, when it was introduced in 1990 as the D model, was the fastest bike in its class. That lasted as a D model until 1993, when it's overtaken by the E, which this is a version of. This is an E7. The first bike in the 600 class to officially register as 100 brake horsepower, although that was at the crank. At the back wheel, everyone reckoned it was a lot closer to 89. Very little variation in this bike. It continued, and actually the last few were sold on discount through dealerships in 2005, so an incredibly long-lived model. Very little change was actually made to it in that time by Kawasaki. Between 1990 and 1993 for this one, the E, and 2005, they replaced the second odometer on the dash with a quite frankly useless digital clock, and the forks were updated from the simple items from the early machine to ones featuring full adjustment on both damping and preload. Right, these machines actually, especially given their age and their classic status, represent exceptionally good value for money and can often be picked up even now for less than £1,000. At the time, although of course you can't do it on the road, also the first bikes to go through the MCN speed track in this class at over 160 miles an hour. I believe it was 161 average both ways. But I say, where else can you get kind of performance for that little money? Right, many owners of these bikes now, like me, are going to be slightly more mature in years, and also that and other considerations means that some sensible modifications are often, a good idea. We're not talking about stuff which, is purely decorative. We're talking about useful things here, so we're going to start at the front end. At the bottom of the mudguard there, don't know if you can see it, is a fender extender. Now initially when I got this bike, you can still see some traces of damage up the centre of the radiators there. The front spray from the wheel had totally wet the centre of the radiator and oil cooler on this. It was caked mud. These bikes were sent out from the factory with the shorter mud guards up to about there, which looked fantastic but did no good at all for protecting the front of the bike from spray off the wheel. Honestly, these are cheap. They save your engine, they save your cleaning, they save you loads of hassle. Definitely worth having. Moving upwards, braided brake lines. Most bikes come equipped with standard rubber lines. They don't last forever. Various opinions sort of differ, but I think most manufacturers say 2 years. Most people in practical use say 7. They tend to flex a lot more. Braided lines, good ones, can be a lifetime replacement for a bike, are often cheaper than the standard ones, and they give you much more power at the front brake through less flex. So they're a no-brainer really. Moving on upwards, the next big modification here is the double bubble screen. Now this one isn't how it came to me. You'll notice there's two cut out sections here. and I'll come to that in a minute. But I work on a budget, and often the things I'll be featuring, either good or bad, will be very cheap items. This particular double bubble screen came straight out of China via eBay for I think less than 13 quid brand new. I've had it on there for years, it's never given me any trouble, and it works perfectly. So you know, sometimes with important things you need to buy good quality, things like brakes, suspension, but on things like this, sometimes stretch your imagination a bit. Going for something cheaper might not always be a bad option. Right, moving around here, the biggest conversion I've done recently, caused purely by the fact I was getting a huge amount of pain in my hips from the standard handlebar layout, is this Moto CNC top yoke conversion. This is also the reason why I've had to cut those sections out for fairing at the screen, sorry, simply because I've raised the handlebars so far I was not getting lock as it's constantly hitting the screen. Right, this is not a cheap conversion, although I would call it reasonably priced. With the bars and all the other bits and pieces you had to get, like the longer brake lines to suit, it cost me about £300, I believe, something like that. Was it £200? I mean, I lose track. But what it does is I've literally raised my handlebars on it from where they were about here originally, coming off the top yoke up to there. I reckon it's got to be about 6 to 8 inches I've raised them, and the difference is huge. I haven't as yet modified the footrest to match. They seem to still be quite comfortable, and the issue I seem to, I look at these aftermarket adjustable kits for the footrests, and I keep worrying about the rear brake and the gear lever, because although you can move the footrest, you're obviously altering the distance between where your foot is then and where you've got to operate the bike, and I haven't really seen any that take that into account, so I'm avoiding doing that for the time being. But somebody might do it, who knows. Right, moving up to here, wonderful little device this is. USB socket so you can power a sat nav or your phone on the move, with a combined voltage meter. Now we're going to move on to that in a minute. These bikes, I say, they do represent brilliant value for money, but apart from the usual wear and tear if you buy one, there are a couple of issues you need to look out for. This is a good idea because there's been a spate recently of regulator rectifiers failing on these machines. There are several, it's an easy change, an easy job, and there's several different price points you can get your replacement for, from £20 all the way up to the standard ones for I think like £130 to £180 depending where you go. I've gone mid-range with a £60 unit from a company called Electrics, which is British made, fully tested, and seems to be working remarkably well. I did initially try a £20 unit in it, but it did fail quite quickly. In fact, right out the box it was overheating and putting out too much volts. So it's one of those cases where with some components you take your choice and you pay your money, but sometimes it's not worth going cheap. Right, moving on down and backwards, again another braided line at the back. The exhaust on this bike is a full stainless system. At the front up to here was by a company called Motad, which were really popular in aftermarket exhaust for a number of years. Indeed, I think they even were the original equipment manufacturer supplier to the early Triumphs, but have now sadly gone out of business. From here backwards, link pipes and silencers are both by a company called Black Widow. The exhaust is very nice. It's a little bit throatier, a little bit louder than standard, but not obnoxiously so, because at my age I don't really like drawing that much attention. Works well, and it should last the life of a bike. Most of these standard systems, if you're looking at a bike like this to buy and it's running the standard system, have a really good poke around that exhaust. The standard steel ones rust out with incredible speed. Rear shock has been replaced with, though you can't see most of it in there, a Hagen. And I'm on this bike, put my hand in my pocket and got one with the remote preload adjuster on the outside. The biggest issue with these, if you decide to carry passengers, is that the only way standard to adjust your preload on these is to literally drop the shock out of the bike, physically remove it, adjust it with a couple of spanners, C-spanners, then refit it, which doesn't really work if you're at your local cafe and someone's asked for a lift home. This bit here, you just turn it one way or the other to increase or decrease the preload. It costs a bit more, but it's worth it. On the whole subject of Hagen shocks, absolutely brilliant service. You phone them up, you tell them your rate, tell them what you want from it, they will build the shock for you and it's sorted. Right. Second hand rear hugger. Replaced the standard chain guard with this, purely to keep the back end of a bike semi-clean. You get a lot of chain thing off here from the bike, and this helps. It was second hand from eBay. It has been slightly damaged in the meantime, which I must refix again. That's just a temporary fix, but yeah, does the job. Now, the other thing with older bikes is sometimes using a bit of imagination if you haven't got much money to fix them. Another common thing with these, normally if you wind them up without actually, because the rear wheel will turn, and if you've got a chain in the back wheel, what will happen is you have a bracket here that holds the chain guard, and that is quite capable of snapping off if you're not careful. It has on mine. The proper way of fixing that would be either to get another second hand swing arm, which means taking the back end apart and fitting it, taking it all apart again, having the bracket alley welded back on again, or drilling into it and making up a bracket. Now, I didn't really want to strip the back end of this bike down because it's in use quite a lot, and I also didn't want to drill into the aluminium because as aluminium ages it can get brittle, and what you could potentially be doing there is putting a weak spot into the metal. So I used a bit of stainless steel from an old coat hanger looped up behind there, the nut and bolt, running backwards down here, and then looped and a longer bolt put in there. It works perfectly, nice and secure, and I could did it in a couple of hours. The other thing, if you get your bike, and particularly if you get it in the shed, is this: use a battery tender on it. It's like a permanent battery charger. All bikes with electric start use a thing called a sprag clutch, pretty much, to make it actually work. If you regularly start your bike up without a full charge in the battery, you are going to kill that sprag clutch. Actually, the sprag clutch from this one actually went not long after I bought it. I had to replace it. Not only is it a lot of cost, but certain parts in a bike this age are getting into short demand, and it actually took me a while to find a sprag clutch. So anyway, there she is. You'll be seeing more of her over the next few weeks, and just because I can't really resist it, I said about the state about exhaust being quite nice. Let's see what it sounds like. My next video, I'll be doing the same with the Royal Enfield, but rather than talking about sensible modifications and things like that, I'll be covering the whole issue of British bikes and British style bikes, why some people think the way they think about them, one way or the other, any real faults and any issues, and why maybe you should think about giving them a go. Thanks for your time, all the best, and see you soon. Ride safe.